Bitcoin has struggled to find mainstream acceptance despite an enthusiastic core of investors. But after 8 years, the virtual currency is not living up to early hype. It still feels more virtual than real. For more on this, we're joined by WSJ Moneybeat reporter Paul Vigna. Those are your words, Paul. Now, you, of course, are an expert on this. You've co-authored a book,
I'm a reporter on it.
Yes, of cryptocurrency. And recently, 2 requests to the SEC were denied.
To market, to sell a Bitcoin ETF, is
right.
what we're talking about there specifically. Yes.
Explain what a Bitcoin ETF is.
Well, it would have been, a normal exchange-traded fund, but rather than the underlying asset being gold or oil or whatever, it would have been Bitcoin. So you had 2 different groups that wanted to build these and sell them to regular Wall Street investment firms, to the street, to the sort of retail investor. And it would have been interesting because it would have been the first time that you really would have had Bitcoin as a thing being sort of marketed to mainstream investors.
Right. And why did the SEC deny?
Well, what the SEC said, among the gist of what the SEC said was that there's no transparency into Bitcoin exchanges, into how Bitcoin is traded. There's no guarantee that it's not being manipulated. There's no regulations around these exchanges.
Right.
We can't watch them. The exchanges, NYSE and BATS, that would have sold these ETFs cannot have agreements with these exchanges to monitor them, so we can't be sure that investors are getting an honest deal, so we can't approve it.
Now,
that's what they said.
Isn't Bitcoin a currency that is supposed to exist outside of government influence? So why would it even apply to be something that would have to fulfill SEC qualifications?
Well, that's kind of sort of the dance that this thing is going around right now. You're right. It is built to exist and to operate outside of any government oversight, outside of any regulatory oversight, and it does exist in that way. But if you want it to be mainstreamed, you're going to have to accept some oversight from the government.
So there seems to be a little bit of a philosophical divide among Bitcoin users.
There's a philosophical divide among users and among backers and among entrepreneurs.
So what is it for exactly?
Well, there's even a debate about what it is for. Is it a currency? Is it a commodity? A lot of people want to promote it as a store of value, as sort of a 21st century digital gold. Other people want to see it become a payment rail. And those are they don't have to be 2 very different things, but you've kind of had these 2 camps trying to push it in different ways.
Right. So despite this disagreement, there is a core of dedicated users. What does this group look like? Who are these people?
Mainly tech savvy, probably politically speaking more libertarian to almost anarchist, crypto anarchists they'll call them. And it has all over. There were a lot of people in China using it. Japan actually just put in some regulations and it is taking off in Japan. That's going to be an interesting one to watch. Any country, any developing world country like Venezuela that's having a problem, they're trying to get it to go there. Africa was being held out as a great hope of where it could possibly take off.
Right. And this core group of dedicated users we were just talking about has pushed up the price. So if you had invested in Bitcoin 4 or 5 years ago, you'd be doing fine.
If you had invested, 4 or 5, 6 years ago, you made a lot of money. But a lot of people, it's really interesting, a lot of people who did do that are still holding it because they think it is going to go even higher.
And as an investment vehicle, though, for most people, it's still a little too volatile, a little too opaque?
It's a little too volatile, a little too opaque, a little too experimental. I mean, you have to keep in mind, Bitcoin is really a giant experiment in building a new kind of currency or commodity or whatever they figure out it's going to be.
Right.
But it is a big experiment. It's a fascinating experiment. It's really interesting. But if you are looking for an investment, it is definitely not something that you should put in money you can't afford to lose.
Thank you so much for that Bitcoin update.
Yeah, happy to be here.